Turns out eyewitnesses are not nearly as reliable as we might think they are. Who you are will very much affect how you see the things that you see. So if you're an artist, you'll look at something and you'll see all the brilliance of the colors. If you're a people person, you'll observe the people. If you're an engineer, you're going to notice kind of the mechanics of the situation. And so when you see something, you see it very much through the lens of who you are and from your personality. So if you were to take Cindy and I, and you were to take it to some new fascinating restaurant or coffee shop, and of course I highly recommend that you do that. If you were to take us, to a new experience and we enjoyed the experience together, and then later you ask us to describe the experience, you would wonder if we were at the same place at the same time. Sometimes I wonder if we've ever been in the same place at the same time. And we have a rule in our house, and this kind of helped our relationship a whole lot. Whoever starts to tell the story gets to tell the whole story without the other person interrupting them to add details. You can do stink face and you can roll your eyes, but you cannot speak up while they're telling the story as a part of that. The Apostle Paul leads us into another way of seeing. Toward the end of his life, as he's reflecting over the persecutions he's faced, the torment that his body has been through, the hard, long nights, cold nights. He's reflecting on the wonderful treasure that God has given him and given us in the gospel. But he also realizes that he has given us this treasure in a very, fragile containers. We're easily broken. We're very, vulnerable. So he describes them. He says, we have this exceedingly great treasure that God has given us, but we carry around these very fragile bodies, which he calls, jars of clay. And then he encourages us. And he says, though outwardly, we're wasting away. Life is eluding us. It's getting away from us. So outwardly, you're wasting away. Inwardly, we're being renewed day by day. And these momentary and light afflictions are producing for us an eternal weight of glory that far outsees them all. And he said, so we fix our eyes not on the things that we can see, but on the things that we can't see. Because the things that we see are temporary, but the things we can't see, those are eternal. And so when you come to the book of Ecclesiastes, you see Colette, the teacher, the preacher, the gatherer of wisdom, the gatherer of people, looking at eyes, looking at life through those two different sets of eyes. Sometimes he looks at what he sees, and it gives him great consternation, and sometimes he looks from the eyes of faith, and that gives him, great encouragement. So when we come to chapter 3, he sees these wonderful, beautiful rhythms that God has created into our life that, make our life so meaningful and so beautiful and so purposeful. But then he sees they're temporary, and he sees that they're fragile, and he sees, that they're fleeting, and he sees that there's tragedy and there's violence that enters into the picture, and so sometimes it's very hard, to see life as we should see through the eyes of faith. So if you have your Bibles, why don't you join me in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 as we continue this journey, and rather than reading the entire passage, I'll take it, piece by piece, as we move, through the passage. Now, when we come to the first 8 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, that's probably the most famous, piece of Hebrew literature, in Western culture today, in no small part, due to the song by the Byrds in the 1960s. And for every season, turn, 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 there is a reason, turn, turn, turn. You with me on that? I mean, it's this awesome little, piece of song. It's been around, for more than 60 years. And you still kind of hear it in commercials and things like that. And so whenever we get to this, we think we know what, the passage, what the passage is saying. On the other hand, this is one of the most incredibly precise pieces of Hebrew literature, in anywhere in the vast, canon of Hebrew literature. It has all the precision and all the meter, of an English sonnet. I mean, it's put together, so well, and it moves in and out, in kind of nice, breathy way. And what, Colette is just trying to remind us is that God has made for us, or God has provided for us appropriate seasons in life that begin to add meaning to your life. And so let's just kind of read this together and make a few observations as we read through it. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the sun. And of course, this is the theme of the entire poem. He said there is a time to be born and there is a time to die. And that's the limits of the rhythms, that we have. There's a time to plant, and of course, if you're in agriculture, you realize this. And there's a time to uproot. You begin, and you start over, and you bring it, to an end. A time to kill. And of course, that may startle us, just a little bit, as in verse 8, it also says there is a time to hate. So he's not, simply describing, our experiences as individuals, but our experiences as a people. And there are sometimes we defend ourselves, and it's very hard, and the realities are very harsh. And then there are some times when we need to bring healing to a situation. He said all of these are things that God has put into the fabric of our life that we experience, through which we can know him and experience him and walk in wisdom. And of course, because this is wisdom literature, here's what he's trying to drive home to us. The heart of wisdom is to know how to respond at any given time to the circumstances that God has laid for us. So obviously, when there's a season for some of these things, we're acting in a way that's opposite of what wisdom would conduct. So this is just a big part of wisdom literature, that a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, time to mourn and then a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent. This is one we could all kind of memorize, crochet, and put on our refrigerator magnets or whatever. Time to be silent, and then there's a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate. I know not that we're ever justified in hating our fellow man, but to hate the things that God hates and to love the way that God loves. And it's very important, for us, and a time for war and a time for peace. So he's giving us, the rhythms of life, the appropriateness of life, and how God is working through all of these rhythms in our life to enrich, the tapestry of their life. You might look at those things that move you most about this poem. Some of the lines are very moving. You might look at those things that challenge you most about this poem. Some of them are very challenging. You might look at the things that are just a little bit upsetting to you, like we've already pointed out, a time to kill and a time to hate, how those can be a proper perspective in a world of ours and how God can even work through those. It's part of the greater, fabric of our life. So it just gives this beautiful poem after he's reflected on how frustrating life can be. He notices from afar, that God has arranged these wonderful rhythms and these beautiful rhythms, and all of them add meaning and depth and purpose to our life. But, and that's, the rest of the book. So we come back, in verse 9, and he comes back to the signature question of the entire book. What do workers, gain from their toil? In other words, we get into these patterns where we get up, we have our routine in the morning, we go to work, we have our routine at work, we come home at night, we have our routine, at night. We're just kind of going through the motions, and sometimes, work demands more of us than we want to. Sometimes, family will demand more of us than we want to. Sometimes we're torn between which activities we should pursue and which activities we shouldn't pursue. What is it that makes life make sense? And that's what he's asking more than anything else. And of course, he's exploring that, as we're talked about, through two different sets of eyes. Sometimes he's just looking at the world the way everybody else would look at the world, and his answers are not all of that encouraging. And sometimes he will move us deeper, and he's moving us toward the final conclusion that we might not ever have all the answers, and we might not ever avoid all of the pitfalls that this life has to avoid, but we can, because life is good and is a gift from God. We can enjoy it deeply and of course, leave an impression on those around us for his sake and for his glory and for his good. So what do workers gain? Why are we even doing this? Why do we get on the merry-go-round every day and do everything that we do? Now, the structure, of this section is really important. The message comes in the structure. If you observe what he's doing, with his phrases, they're tightly woven together. So you see in verse 10, the words, I have seen. Then you see in verse 12, I know. Then you see in verse 14, I know. So in verse 10, he's saying, this is what I see with my eyes. But for the first time, and beginning in verse 12, when he says, I know, and then in verse 14, when he says, I know, he's coming back to the roots of his Hebrew faith. Here is what I am seeing in the world, but here is where my faith takes me. So we have two confessions of faith, one very simple and one very, complex as you look at it. I have seen the burden that God has laid on the human race, verse 10. He's made everything beautiful. Well, that's not just really a whole lot of burden, is it? Wait a second. He's made everything beautiful in his time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. This shouldn't surprise us. And when we look at ourselves, when we look at our world, when we look at each other, there are two things that you should always expect to see. One of them is beauty. The incredible beauty of having been created in God's image as a reflection of who he is. And of course, the beauty of the way that God has done this, and Sam pointed this out, so beautifully, even if we all were everything that Jesus created us to be, it doesn't mean we would look like each other, it means we would look like him. Because every part of you is a part of an expression of who he is. And so there's a wonderful beauty, you see in everyone you lock eyes with. You will never lock eyes with anyone who does not deeply matter to God, whom he has not put his creative energy in. And more importantly, whom he has not given his son in order to redeem the lostness within them. So on the one hand, we should, we shouldn't be surprised to find beauty, but on the other hand, we shouldn't be surprised to find frustration. Because the other part of the truth of the first 3 chapters of Genesis, not only do we live in a beautiful world created by God in which we can experience him and know and see and enjoy the beauty that he's created, but we also live in a fallen world where we've rejected God. And there's a built-in frustration factor because we have pushed God out of our lives and reserved the right for ourselves to make the final call on what is good and best and right for us. So it's not about eating an apple. It's about rejecting God's leadership in order to forge our own path, in order to follow our own heart, in order to decide what is good and best and right for us. And whenever we do, it leads to frustration. So you have that, in Romans chapter 8, when Paul just uses that word. At this time, all of creation is moaning because of the frustration of what we have brought into creation, and it's waiting for our redemption. In order for creation to be made right, we need to be made right. In order for your marriage to be made right, we need to, well, not we, that's pretty much on you. You need to be made right. In order for Christ's church to be Christ's church, as Jesus envisions what Christ's church to be, we need to, be made right. So it's not about our outward circumstances. If we could only live, with, better people in Washington or better people in the Capitol in Austin or whatever it is, that, we're striving for and hoping for. And if this finally happens, everything, all the pieces will fall together. No, they won't. The gospel speaks not only to the circumstances of the world we live in, it speaks to the condition of our heart. And so there is a frustration that he has built us for eternity. And isn't it interesting that almost every culture you find, except for ours, Western culture, there's a sense of the eternal. That there's far more to life, than the moment. We're the one group that kind of tends, to look to the moment, for meaning than to look for something, bigger than that. So he has also set eternity in the human heart, yet we can't really fathom what he's doing. Now, a lot of theologians, that's very frustrating because we want an explanation for everything God is doing all the time, and we won't be satisfied until we have the ultimate explanation for everything God is doing all the time. That's so far beyond your pay grade, I can't even believe you're going there. And even if it weren't beyond your pay grade, it's well beyond your capacity. I mean, to understand God and all of his beauty, and all, he is, I just want to remind you, and I should do this, more often than I do. I just do it about every other month, and we should probably do it. He is infinite and you're finite. So what is the difference between infinite and finite? It's still infinite. I mean, you can put a little ripple in the pond, but they're still infinitely more wise than we are, infinitely more beautiful than we are, infinitely more powerful than we are, infinitely more in control and bringing everything toward a good end than we are. And if we have to figure out what God is doing in order to enjoy what God is doing, your brain will explode before you ever know the joy of following Christ. So David, on one occasion in the Psalm said, "Help me not to concern myself with things too wonderful for me." Let's repeat that together as a confession of faith this morning. Help me not concern myself with things too wonderful for me. Like Calvinism. But anyway, there we are. We don't have to have it figured out to rest in it and to know, who's in control. So here's this first I know, or here's this first faith affirmation. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live. That each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil, for this is a gift of God. And of course, he told us in chapter 2, a gift only God can give. You can enjoy, eat or drink, but deep joy, satisfying joy, lasting joy has one source and one source only, and that's to be vitally connected to our Creator. And while we're pursuing all of these little things, to bring joy into our life, we're missing the big thing that is a source of all joy. Matter of fact, it is a joy that is, Jesus said, I'm saying these things to you while I'm still with you, so my joy might be in you and your joy might be complete. My peace I give to you, not like the world gives. It's a peace that's beyond our understanding in spite of the brokenness, in spite of our unanswered questions, and finding, joy in Him. Now, this is, and we said last week, this is a theological key to this book, this little phrase. There are 7 of them. So this conclusion he's building for, how do we function within the tragedy? How do we function with all the unanswered questions? How do we function with the frustrations of life? How do we function when nothing seems to work? Our marriages sometimes don't seem to work. Our church sometimes doesn't seem to work. Our nation doesn't sometimes, seem to work. Nothing seems to work. How do we function with those frustrations? You find joy in the moment that comes only from our Creator, and enjoy it as a gift from God without having to have all of your questions answered. Right? And that doesn't mean we don't pursue, answers and think deeply. It means we have more confidence in the one who holds those answers than our ability to put all the pieces together. Right? There is, something he's added here that, is important as you're tracing these arguments. So he'll give them to us 7 times, and it'll be part of his big conclusion. And of course, in wisdom literature, when you have a 7, you want to pay attention to it. And 7 are these kind of carpe diem statements. Learn how to live in the moment. In 24 was the first one. He said, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This, too, I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can do this? And who can really find deep joy in life apart from God? Now, you'll notice that there's a slight tweak in verse 12. And so if you're a very astute, Bible student, which, my goodness, all of you are, you're so well taught. Okay, it's my fault. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy, and here it is, and to do good. My goodness. Where did that come from? Because a while ago, I was really tracking them with this. Let's eat, drink, and just be happy. And that sounds awesome. When is the sermon's over? Let's go do it right now and do that. There's more to that than just enjoying the good gifts that God has given us. And this is built into creation from the beginning and is a heart of, the Old Testament law. And of course, is the heart of the law of grace that we have in the Lord Jesus Christ, that we no longer live for ourselves, but we live for Him and for those around us. And this is what adds meaning to our life. Not so much that we have figured out all the answers and we've avoided all the tragedies, but we offer ourselves to him and to one another in grace. That we love our neighbor as we love ourselves, or as Paul, would say that we look not only to our own interests, but to the interests of others, considering others, he says this, better than yourselves. My word. But the heart of our purpose is, to steward the resources God has given us, to enjoy the work he has given us for his glory, in partnership with him, and for the sake of others, and for our joy. And all of those, are tied deeply together. Now here is this deeper, confession of faith. Verse 14, I know that everything God does will endure, forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing can be taken away from it. God does it so that people will fear him. In other words, behind these beautiful rhythms of life, and not only behind the beautiful rhythms of life, but behind all of these tragedies and all of these mysteries that we can't fully satisfy ourselves on, God is working for purposes that cannot in any way be thwarted. The one who has made everything beautiful, we have just, kind of affirmed that, is making all things beautiful. And he is working, as Paul would simply say it in Romans, he is causing everything around us, all the tragedy, all the unanswered questions, all the hiccups in life, all of the hard spots, that we come through together for our good, for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. He is, in spite of how we feel in the moment, creating a masterpiece of grace in and through our moments. And it is beyond that. I had to, correct, Brian Shapley, a little bit earlier. He said, he was talking about something that happened in his house, and he said, sometimes God is gracious. I said, Brian, come on. What's the real answer, Brian? God is always gracious. We just don't, it doesn't always feel gracious, does it? Sometimes his mercies are severe mercies. Sometimes they hurt a little bit, but they're delivering a beauty that is beyond imagination. And without the severeness, the beauty never comes. That's what the cross is, right? I mean, just look at it. The most severe act of mercy possible and the greatest beauty possible in that. And so we rest in God's sovereignty, knowing he's in control. Just like David said a while ago, I don't get caught up with things that are too wonderful with me. He said, I find myself in God's presence, satisfied as a weaned child in the lap of its mother. I just find contentment in him. Doesn't mean I don't ask questions. Doesn't mean I don't struggle with injustice. It just simply means that I have a bigger picture of what God is doing, and that's where I find my joy, right? Now we come to the last part of the chapter, and the last part of the chapter, he presents us with one of the biggest, conundrums or mysteries or difficulties, of life. Just as soon as things, start to make sense, we're confronted with injustice. So he says, and notice again, structure. Structure is everything in Hebrew poetry. In verse 16, I saw. Verse 17, I said to myself. Verse 18, I also said to myself. And then in verse 22, so I saw. Do you see the pattern? I saw, I said, I saw. And this time, the pattern you had in the first few verses were, I saw and I know and I know. But now he's looking internally again, and because he's looking internally again rather than externally to, faith of the Hebrews and the God of the universe, who has placed these wonderful seasons in his life, has put eternity in our hearts, has made everything beautiful according to his time. He's beginning to try to work these out in his own imagination. And once again, and so you have answers that point to God, but they're a little less optimistic in that. So what does he see? And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was also there. The problem of, injustice. This is pretty interesting. probably the first thing your kids learn to say with conviction is the words, "That's not fair." You remember that? No matter what you did, that's just not fair. We come into this world, with a sense of justice and a sense of fairness, and somehow our sense of justice and our sense of fairness is never, satisfied. I'm going to be very careful as how I tread here, but look what's going on in our country. If you watch, Fox News, they're going to list all of the injustices over here, and you're going to go, my goodness, this is broken. Then if you watch, and you don't, of course, because you're so godly, right? But I mean, if just occasionally you glanced over to MSNBC and you see the other side, saying, the system is broken and people have, motives that are more about, politics and power than they are, about all of these things. So whether that's true or not, whether it's imagined or not, we're still saying the same things, right? It's just not fair. And this side of heaven, it won't be. It won't be. Even in the very best of intentions, in the very best of systems, in the very best of moments, we live in a world where those who should be delivering justice, and this includes us, right, don't always deliver. And of course, I have a lot of confidence in our system. I think we have better than anyone else, but it doesn't mean we avoid this, right? So I said to myself, and this is close to a confession. It's very, very, matter of fact, it's a beautiful completion of the poem. God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there'll be a time for every activity and a time to judge every deed. And isn't it interesting that it doesn't say, that God will finally judge them, those unrighteous. You guys aren't even laughing with me. It's okay, I'm enjoying myself. All of us will be shown inadequate. All of us will be shown having faltered. All of us will be shown to have been a bigger part of the problem than we are part of the solution. All of us will be shown and revealed. And of course, our comfort is that one day God's going to make it right. And it's not just a matter of, judgment and destruction. It's a matter of judgment and restoration. I know that God's, doing in and through us. I also said to myself, now this is where he gets a little more pessimistic. He said, I also said to myself, verse 18, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they're like the animals. Oh my goodness. Obviously he has somebody else in mind, right? When he said that. But he said, sometimes you would look at us and sometimes you see this wonderful spark of the divine creativity, beauty. There's just all of these things. And then other times you look at us and you go, my goodness, how could things possibly, look like that? And he said, and when you see these injustices in the world, you have to ask your question, are we more created in the image of our Creator, or are we more like animals around us? And in certain instances, you have to look in this world and say, my goodness, we're more, like animals. Surely the fate, verse 19 of humans is like that of animals. Now, he's already done this. He's already done this. He has this looming sense of death. And if there is any gift I could give you this morning, it would be that, a looming, no, that's not what it would do. But you should think about it from time to time, right? It could happen quicker than you think. I know you're looking at me right now and you think you'll outlast me. And I sure hope you do. Most of you. But we don't know. We do not know. And for Colette, it's the great equalizer. Because one day everything's going to be called to nothing. And what difference is there going to be between you and any other creature? What difference is there going to be between, the wise and the fool? And his meditation, bothers us just a little bit. Verse 20, all go to the same place. All come from dust. Does the dust, all return? Who knows? If the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth. In the Old Testament, we don't have, the clarity and the certainty we have, of life after death. There's one very clear passage, in Daniel chapter 12, 2 or 3. But this is still an argument people are having when Jesus comes on the scene. Between, the Sadducees, who are the ruling party of the Jewish people, who really, have a supernatural worldview and don't think that there is a final resurrection, kind of thing. So they are, they find themselves in the same position Colette finds himself in, just wondering, how can we make sense of everything under the sun? Justice, injustice, tragedy, loss, mystery. How can we possibly make sense of that? Because this is it. You may as well, just eat and drink and enjoy life. And of course they were, because they were the wealthiest of the wealthy. That was good for them, but it's not good for the laborer, that Colette's so interested in, who labors hard and may not have enough grain to feed his family at the end of the day. It's good for a few. But there's a wonderful clarity in Daniel chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, but even more wonderful clarity in the life and death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. All right? So where do we find our answers? Not in our observation of life under the sun, not in our effort to make sense of life under the sun, not in our own efforts to enjoy life and forget about the pain all around us, but in the ultimate redemptive work of God, who has defeated death and is restoring all things in Christ Jesus. And that not only brings perspective to every moment, it brings vivid perspective to what is this life all about. We're built for relationship with him. One day we'll be restored to relationship with him. In the moment, we enjoy relationship with him. And of all the treasures we have in this moment, stewarding that relationship for his glory, for the sake of others, and for our ultimate joy as the principal preoccupation of those who know and love the Lord. Let's stand.